is Graeme back with another installment of my free Facebook e-class, Calorie Cycling for Rapid Fat Loss. And in today's lesson, we're really going to look at the big three strikes against calorie counting as a means to control one's weight. Now it's kind of funny, because when we look at it, we have tremendous improvements in our understanding of science, genetics, yet as we saw last time, as a nation we are seeing these phenomenal increases in our level of obesity. Now how is this possible? So again, just to remind you of last time, we saw that over about a 20-year time span in the US, we saw a doubling of the percentage of the population who was obese. So that was extremely troubling. Then we kind of looked back at kind of our conventional diet theory, which goes, we will gain weight when we take in too much energy from food, and we will lose weight if we increase our energy expenditure through exercise, as well as decrease the number of calories we take in from our food. But if we look at kind of what's happened to the population, maybe it's not working so great. And then we also looked at some other weight loss math. And that math was, a human can gain 5 pounds of fat in a year if every day they overconsumed as little as 50 calories. Now, although this doubling of obesity rates is definitely troubling, we saw that with some Canadian data, in the last 10 years or so, 10, 15 years, we've increased our caloric intake by 400 calories. And although we are getting fatter, we aren't getting fatter at the rate predicted by this weight loss equation, or weight mass equation. So what gives? Well, today we're really going to look at how calorie counting works on the level of an individual, not across the population as a whole. So based on what we know from math and science, that 1 gram of carbohydrate, when you burn it in the lab, will give you 4 calories worth of energy. Same goes for 1 gram of protein. It gives you, about 4 calories worth of energy. A gram of fat is more than twice as concentrated in terms of energy, so it gives you about 9 calories per gram, and a gram of alcohol is going to give you 7 calories per gram. So, according to conventional diet theory, it really doesn't matter where these calories are coming from. As long as we make sure the total calories are appropriate by the end of the day, someone should be able to lose weight. But is that really the case? Let's take a look. Now, unfortunately, nutrition isn't necessarily the strongest science of all time. And if we just look at two simple cases like how much energy we actually get from something high in fiber versus how much energy the human body actually gets from something high in protein. Now, although the math projects out to giving us 8 kilojoules in the case of fiber and almost 17 kilojoules in the case of protein, in reality the human body actually absorbs far less energy. Now, why is this? Well, part of the reason has to do with not all macronutrients are absorbed with the same degree of efficiency. Take something like fat. Fat in the diet is already in largely the right form to store as new body fat. So it kind of makes sense. If we wildly overconsume fat from the diet, it's pretty easy for our bodies to store it as new body fat. Makes sense. Carbohydrates are also in a form that is relatively easy for our body to turn into new body fat. Okay? However, when we look at something like protein, it takes a lot of work. For a human to take 1 gram of protein, first it's got to break it down into all its amino acids, then it's going to convert a bunch of those amino acids into sugar or glucose, and then it's got to take the glucose and work it back into fat. It's a lot of steps, and the human body is instinctively lazy. It doesn't like doing all this extra work. So we start to see that if someone consumes a greater portion of their diet in the form of protein, they might not actually absorb quite as much energy. So again, we can't really go with a calorie is a calorie is a calorie, because clearly it might not be. That's really going to leave us with strike one against the calorie counting approach, because we know that different macronutrients provide different amounts of energy. Let's move on. We also know that cooking and food preparation techniques can change the amount of energy that the body absorbs. Take something like an egg. When we cook an egg, it is very easy for the body to absorb a lot of that energy and the protein in there. Now, if we were to try to eat a raw egg, we really have a tougher time getting, a bunch of those amino acids out. We can extend this to something like white bread. Now, everyone knows that white bread isn't all that good for you, that it's pretty high glycemic index, so your body absorbs the energy in there really rapidly. But the funny thing is, if we toast white bread, or if we freeze white bread, it lowers the glycemic index. Now, I still wouldn't recommend eating a lot of white bread, but this is just used to show that when we cook something or change its state, it changes how the body's going to deal with that food. Take something like something that's really high in fiber and is hard, is very dense. Okay, your digestive system is going to have to work pretty hard to get the energy out of there. Think of things like broccoli and cauliflower, really fibrous vegetables. It is very difficult for your body to go in and get energy out of things like this. Contrast this to something like a brownie or a pureed soup. Okay, a lot of the work in breaking that energy down has already been done. So it's pretty simple now for our bodies to actually absorb that energy. So we see that although the calorie count might be equivalent, when we change how easy or difficult it is for our body to actually absorb something, we can change how many calories get into the system. So that's really going to leave us with strike two. Okay, and that the food preparation technique can change the number of calories we absorb from a certain food. Let's move on. Okay, and this is pretty alarming. Okay, and this was a study done just this year, and they were looking at the energy content on labels and whether that actually what was in the food. And this was a study done out of Boston, but they looked at frozen dinners, and they just bought a bunch of frozen dinners, and on average, the worst case scenario was that these frozen dinners underestimated the total caloric content of the meal by 8%. Okay, so that's quite a lot when we start doing the math. But even more alarming than the frozen dinners, this same group did a bunch of the same things for restaurant meals. And some of the restaurant meals were underestimated by as much as 18%, which is very high. But the worst part of all this is that the FDA actually considers that calorie counts on labels can underestimate by up to 20%. Okay, that's a phenomenally high number, and our government regulators are saying, you know what, don't worry about it. So let's just do a little bit of math here. We know that the calorie value on labels can be off as much as 10 to almost 18%. If we just plug in some numbers, if I needed a 2,000 calorie diet, and my label could be off by anywhere from 8 to 18%, that means I might actually be eating 180 to 360 calories more per day than I thought I did. So even if I'm faithfully tracking all my calories that come into my body based on I always read labels, I'm measuring everything, we still can be off by almost 20%. If you recall that simple weight loss math I threw at you earlier, that 5 pounds of fat gained per year computes out to only being off by 50 calories a day, well, we start to see the huge problems with trying to manage our weight strictly based on calorie counting. Okay, we know that as a society we're not gaining 5 pounds of fat a year, and we see that there's all these problems with calorie counting, so maybe we need to do away with it. Okay, so that's really strike three. We know that labeling, to put it kindly, is an inexact science, and so where do we really need to go in terms of helping people manage their weight? We know that calorie counting results in a failure rate of 90% plus. People who lose weight will gain all that weight back, if not more, within 2 years' time. Okay, and that's really what we're going to start addressing in lesson 3. We're going to look at what actually happens in the body when you diet, and then kind of maybe start creating some solutions to go beyond simple calorie counting. So just a reminder, if you liked this lesson and you haven't already done so, do make sure you join the Facebook group, Calorie Cycling for Rapid Fat Loss, and I highly encourage you visit my website, which is graemethomasonline.com, where we talk about a lot of these things and we look at a lot more science, as well as practical solutions for weight loss. And that's it, so I'll see you next time.